The first thing I noticed was that the seal was wrong. I have stood the north checkpoint of Harrowgate Palace for 11 winters, and in that time I have inspected perhaps 9,000 departure manifests. A manifest is a dull thing, a strip of stiff paper folded twice and pressed with the wax of whatever office authorized the carriage to pass the outer wall. Most men in my post give it a glance and wave the wheels through. I read them. I have always read them, letter by letter, because my old sergeant taught me that a lie hides best in the place no one bothers to look, and a manifest is the most unlooked-at page in a kingdom. The seal on the manifest the footman handed me that gray morning was the small oval of the Queen Consort's household, a swan above a closed gate. That was ordinary. Her carriage left the palace 2 or 3 mornings a week, off to the river house or the milliner, or wherever ladies of her rank spent the coin of a realm they had married into. What was not ordinary was the wax. Household wax is bottle green. This wax was green, yes, but a shade too dark, and it had been pressed while too hot, so the swan's neck had blurred into a smear. A seal pressed in haste. A seal pressed by a hand that did not do it often. Reeve, the footman on the carriage box, knew my name and did not like using it. Her Grace is expected at the river house before the tide turns. You'll not keep her. I'll keep no one longer than the law keeps them, I said, which was the answer my sergeant taught me for exactly this, and which pleases no one and offends no one, and buys a man the 3 breaths he needs to think. I looked past the smeared swan to the body of the carriage. It was the tall black one with the silvered lamps, the one the Queen Consort favored because it rode high enough that the common folk had to look up to see who sat inside. The curtains were drawn. That too was ordinary. She did not care to be gaped at. But the springs sat low over the rear axle, lower than a carriage carrying one slender woman and her maid ought to sit. There was weight in that carriage. Weight in the boot where the traveling chests rode, and weight, I thought, somewhere lower still. I have learned to trust the small wrongness. It is not a gift. It is the residue of 11 winters of watching people who believe a uniform means the man inside it does not think. They lie to the uniform. They lie badly because they are certain the uniform will not check, and so the man inside learns to check. The manifest lists 2 chests and a hamper, I said. Household goods and the ladies' linens for the river house. That's what it lists, the footman agreed, because that's what's aboard. Then Her Grace will forgive me a moment at the boot. I stepped toward the rear of the carriage, unhurried, my rifle at the carry, my white gloves clean. Behind me at the gatehouse I heard my corporal, a good square lad named Osric, come off the wall and take a slow position where he could see the whole of the forecourt without seeming to. He had learned to read me the way I read manifests. The curtain of the near window twitched. A voice came through it, and I knew the voice, because everyone in Harrowgate knew the voice, low, cool, and edged like the lip of a glass. Guardsman, Queen Consort Morwenna did not raise it. She never raised it. Whatever is your name? Havard Reeve, Your Grace, North Checkpoint. Havard Reeve of the North Checkpoint. She said my name the way one reads an item off a bill of goods to be sure of what one is paying for. I am late. You will open the gate. I will, Your Grace, I said. The moment I've matched the manifest to the load, as the standing order requires. It's the work of 2 minutes. There was a silence from behind the curtain that lasted exactly as long as it took a proud woman to decide whether outrage or ice would serve her better. She chose ice. The curtain fell still, and in that stillness I understood, the way you understand a thing before you have the words for it, that I had just done something that could not be taken back. A guardsman who inconveniences a queen is a guardsman who had better be right. I was not yet sure I was right. I was only sure that the wax was wrong and the springs were low, and a manifest sealed in haste is a manifest someone did not want read slowly. That is not proof. It is a splinter under the skin. But a man learns to dig for splinters, because the ones you leave in go bad. I should tell you where the kingdom stood that morning, because the manifest did not exist in a quiet world. King Alaric had reigned 40 years and was tired in the way that great old trees are tired, still standing, still throwing shade over the whole realm, but hollow enough at the heart that a strong wind put the household on edge. His first queen, Isolde, had died 9 years before, and the whole realm had mourned her, because she had been the sort of queen the common folk make songs about, plain-spoken, generous, forever pressing coin into the hands of the wrong people, which is to say the people who needed it. She had left one son, Crown Prince Rowan, and she had left a great deal else besides. Her own estate at Renfell, the jewels her mother's mother had brought from the eastern marches, a stable of horses she had bred by hand, and a locked room in the east wing that no one had opened since the day she died, because the king could not bear to and no one else had the right. 3 years after Isolde was buried, the king married again. He married Morwenna. I will not pretend I understood it then, and I do not pretend to understand it now. She was younger than him by 20 years, a widow of a minor house with a grown son of her own, Lord Cassius, a soft-handed man with expensive tastes and a laugh that never reached his eyes, and a daughter, Lady Verena, who was cleverer than her brother and colder than her mother, which is saying a great deal. Morwenna came to Harrowgate with 3 trunks and left within a year holding the keys to half the household. The king, in his tiredness, found it easier to say yes to her than to say no, and a man who reigns 40 years learns that saying yes is the least of his labors. The realm did not love her, the realm was not asked to. But the realm noticed things, the way the realm always does, and what it noticed in the last 2 years was that the late Queen Isolde's things were quietly going missing. A brooch here, a tapestry there. The Renfell estate, which by every right should have passed whole to Crown Prince Rowan when he came of full inheritance, was said to be tangled now in claims and counterclaims that no one could quite explain, papers appearing and disappearing in the offices of the household treasury. Rowan was a patient man, his mother's son, honorable to the bone, and he had let it lie because he did not want a war with his father's wife under his dying father's roof. So that was the ground beneath the wheels of the tall black carriage. A fading king, a grieving prince, a dead queen whose estate was bleeding away by inches, and a living queen who signed her name to more and more of it every season, always with the ink still wet on some document no one had been shown. And now that carriage sat at my gate with weight in its boot, and a seal pressed in haste, and its mistress wished very much to be gone before the tide turned. "Corporal Osric," I said, not loudly, "fetch the checkpoint log and the standing order for household departures, and send the runner to the officer of the day." Osric's eyes flicked to mine. "The officer of the day is Captain Bale, Reeve." I knew who the officer of the day was. That was rather the difficulty. Captain Bale was a lean, ambitious man who had risen faster than his years by understanding a simple truth that most soldiers never learn, that the surest road up is to be useful to whoever is climbing fastest, and to never once ask where they are climbing to. In the last 2 years, Bale had made himself useful to the Queen Consort's household. Nothing you could name. A gate opened a little early here. A search waved off there. A guardsman reassigned from a post he'd asked too many questions at. Bale would come to my gate, and Bale would look at the smeared swan and the low springs, and Bale would tell me to open the gate and log nothing, and Bale would be within his authority to do it. "Send the runner anyway," I said. "The order says the officer of the day is to be summoned when a search of a royal carriage is contemplated. I contemplate one. Log the time." Osric wrote the time. I watched him write it, because a written time is a small, unbreakable thing, and I had a feeling, the splinter digging deeper, that before this morning was over I would want a record that no one could smear like wax. The curtain twitched again. "You have sent for someone," Morwenna observed. She had heard the runner's boots. "For the officer of the day, your grace, as the order requires when a lady of the household's carriage is held." "You imagine I don't know what the orders require." A pause, cool and considering. "Guardsman Reeve." I am going to give you a piece of counsel, and you would do well to take it, because I shall only offer it once. There are men in this palace who have grown old and gray standing at gates, holding rifles they will never fire, guarding doors that open for everyone but them. And there are men who understood at the right moment which way the wind sat and who are warm and fed and thanked for it. The moment is generally a small one, a gate, a morning, a choice to be sensible. The curtain shifted. I imagined the pale line of her jaw behind it. This is your moment. Open the gate. It was, I will grant her, a very good speech. She had clearly given it before in one form or another to Baal and to men like Baal, and it had clearly worked, because men like Baal were warm and fed and thanked. And there was a version of me that heard it and felt the cold of the gate and the long gray years and thought, it is only a manifest. But my old sergeant, who was dead now and buried in the guardsman's plot beyond the mews, had said a thing to me once that I have never been able to put down. He said, "They will always tell you it is a small thing, boy, and the size of the thing they call small is exactly the measure of how much they are afraid of it." The seal was smeared, the springs were low, and the Queen Consort of the realm was standing at my gate offering me a warm old age to not look in her boot. "Your Grace," I said, "I've heard your counsel, and I thank you for it, and I'll open the gate the instant the load matches the manifest." "Corporal, the officer of the day." "Runners away, Reeve," said Osric, and then lower so only I could hear, "It'll be Baal that comes." "I know," I said, "log that too." Captain Baal came across the forecourt at a walk that was meant to look unhurried and did not quite manage it. He was a handsome man in the way that a well-made blade is handsome, all edge and no warmth, and he wore his sash a fraction too tight, so that everything about him looked braced. He took in the scene at a glance. The tall black carriage, the drawn curtains, me at the boot, Osric with the log, the runner catching his breath by the gatehouse arch. And I watched his face do the small calculation I had known it would do. "Whose morning is this?" the face asked. "Whose morning do I make mine?" "Guardsman Reeve." He did not use my rank. He rarely used any man's rank who stood below him. It was one of the ways he reminded a wall of men that he was above it. "You've held her Grace's carriage. On what authority?" "Standing Order 41, Captain. A departing carriage whose manifest doesn't match its evident load is held pending inspection. The manifest lists 2 chests and a hamper. The springs say more." "The springs." Baal's mouth moved into something that wanted to be a smile. "You've halted the Queen Consort of the realm on the testimony of a set of springs." "On the testimony of a manifest sealed too hot to read, Captain, and a load heavier than it declares. The springs are only what made me look twice." I kept my voice level and my eyes forward, because a man who argues gives ground, and a man who reports does not. "I've sent for the officer of the day, as 41 requires. You're here. I request authorization to inspect the boot and the carriage compartments against the manifest." For a moment I thought he would refuse outright, and I had my answer ready, that a refusal, logged, would sit in the checkpoint record with his name on it forever, and that a man who wished to climb might not want that particular stone in his boot. But Baal was cleverer than a flat refusal. He stepped close, so that his words fell only on me, and he dropped his voice into the register men use when they are being reasonable at you. "Reeve, listen to me, because I am going to save your career, which is more than you deserve. You've made a mistake. It happens. A green man's eagerness, a bad morning, a shadow that looked like a wolf. No harm's done yet. You open the gate now, I log it as a routine hold cleared by the officer of the day, and by noon it's a thing that never happened. Her Grace forgets your name. You go back to your gate. In a year you're a sergeant if you've the sense to let me help you." He let that sit. "Or you insist." You tear the boot open in front of the whole forecourt, and you find the lady's linens, exactly as the manifest says, and you have publicly accused the king's wife of smuggling her own bedsheets. And then, Reeve, then I cannot save you, because there is nothing left to save. Do you understand what I'm offering you?" I understood it perfectly. It was the same speech Morwenna had given me, in a soldier's mouth. And that was the thing that decided me, if I am honest, not courage, not honor, nothing so clean. It was that two people had now offered me the exact same warm bargain within the same quarter hour, using nearly the same words, and no one troubles to bribe a man twice over an empty boot. "Captain," I said, "if the boot holds only linens, I'll take my discipline for it, and I'll take it gladly, because it will mean the realm's safe. Authorize the inspection or refuse it. Either way, Corporal Osric logs your answer, with the time in your name." Bale looked at Osric. Osric looked back at him with the flat, patient, unbudgeable face of a man from the Fen country who has decided a thing, and will not be moved off it by weather or rank. The log was open. The pen was wet. And Bale, who understood better than anyone in that forecourt exactly how a written record could outlive a man's cleverness, understood that he had walked into a room with two doors, and both of them led somewhere he did not want to go. That was when the third door opened, because that was when Crown Prince Rowan came down the steps. He had not been sent for. I want that understood, because in the days that followed there were those who said the whole business was a trap the prince had laid for his stepmother, and it was not. Rowan came down the steps that morning for the plainest reason in the world. He had heard, as everyone in the near wing had heard, that his stepmother's carriage was held at the north gate, and the prince, being the prince, came to see whether the realm's honor was being served or embarrassed. He came alone, in a plain riding coat, without ceremony, which was his way. And he stopped at the edge of the forecourt and took in the same scene Bale had taken in, and his reading of it was different, because Rowan read men the way I read manifests, slowly, and to the last letter. "Captain Bale," he said, "guardsman, what's the hold?" Bale turned, and I watched the calculation run across his face a second time, faster now and more frightened, because the arithmetic had changed. The Queen Consort was one power, the Crown Prince was another, and an ambitious man who has spent 2 years quietly serving the first now had to stand in the open between the two of them and be seen to choose. His voice, when it came, had lost some of its edge. "A misunderstanding, Highness. Guardsman Reeve has held her Grace's carriage over an irregularity in the manifest. I was in the act of resolving it. There's no need to trouble your Highness." "Whose need decides that?" Rowan asked it mildly, but the mildness was the kind that has a floor of iron under it. He came forward until he stood a few paces from the boot, and he looked at me, and I will tell you that being looked at by that man was like being weighed on an honest scale. "Guardsman Reeve, in your own words, what did you see?" So I told him. The seal pressed too hot, the swan smeared, the springs sitting low over the rear axle, the manifest declaring less than the carriage plainly carried. I told him about the standing order, and the summons to the officer of the day, and because I had decided I was past the point of prudence, and might as well be hanged for the whole cloth. I told him plainly that within the quarter hour I had been offered a warm and comfortable future by 2 separate people, if I would only open the gate without looking, and that no one offers a man that twice over an empty boot. The forecourt was very quiet when I finished. Somewhere on the wall a pigeon shifted and resettled. And the curtain of the carriage, which had hung still through all of it, twitched once, and the cool voice came out of it, and this time there was something under the ice that had not been there before. Not fear. Morwenna did not do fear, but calculation sharpened. "Rowan," she used his name like a mother, which she was not, "your guardsman is overwrought. He's built a conspiracy out of a hot wax seal. I'm late for the river house, the tide is turning, and I would take it as a kindness if the future king of this realm did not spend his morning helping a gate soldier humiliate his father's wife over a hamper of linens. Send me on. We'll all laugh about it at supper." I have thought a great deal since about the moment that followed, because it was the hinge on which the whole day turned, and it turned on almost nothing. It turned on the fact that Rowan did not answer his stepmother at once. He stood, and he looked at the tall black carriage, and I watched him think, and I believe now that what he was thinking was not about wax or springs at all. I believe he was thinking about a locked room in the East Wing, and a brooch that had gone missing, and an estate at Renfell that was bleeding away in papers no one had shown him, and about how a patient man tells himself for 2 years that he does not want a war under his father's roof, until the morning comes when the war is standing at his gate, and the only thing worse than fighting it is pretending, one more time, that it isn't there. "Mother," he said, he called her that always, out of a courtesy she had never earned, "if it's linens, we'll all laugh at supper, and I'll apologize to you myself before the whole court if you like." He turned to me. "Guardsman Reeve, you have my authority. Open the boot." I gave my rifle to Osric and went to the rear of the carriage. The boot was closed with a strap and a small brass hasp, and the hasp was locked, which the manifest had not mentioned, because a manifest that declares linens does not trouble to note that the linens are locked away. I did not force it. I do not believe in forcing a lock when the person who holds the key is 10 feet away and has a great deal to lose by refusing. "The key, your grace," I said toward the curtain, "for the boot." Nothing, the curtain hung still. "Her grace's footman will have it," Rowan said, and the footman, a young man who had gone the color of tallow, produced from his waistcoat a small ring of keys with the air of a man handing over the thing that will hang him. His fingers shook. I have seen a great many frightened men in 11 winters, and I know the difference between a man frightened of trouble and a man frightened of what he knows, and this was the second kind. I opened the boot. There were, in fact, 2 chests and a hamper exactly as the manifest declared, and for the length of one long breath I felt the whole forecourt lean toward the possibility that I was a fool, that Bale was right, that I had halted a queen over her bedsheets. The nearer chest, when I lifted the lid, held linens, folded white linens, lavender-scented, precisely what a lady takes to a river house. Behind me I heard Bale let out a slow breath through his nose, the breath of a man who sees a stone he can climb on. But the springs, I had not imagined the springs. Linens do not press a carriage low over its rear axle. I set the linen chest aside. It was light, far too light for its size, and I looked at the second chest, and I saw that it sat lower in the boot than it should, as though the boot beneath it were not the flat board of a carriage floor but something built up, something with a space beneath. "There's a false floor," I said. I had not said it to anyone in particular, but the effect of it in that forecourt was as though I had drawn a blade. The footman made a small sound, and the cool voice came out of the curtain at last, and it had changed again, and now there was iron in it, real iron, the sound of a woman who has decided the time for speeches is done. "Rowan, I forbid this. Do you hear me? I am the Queen Consort of this realm, and I forbid a common soldier to take my carriage apart on a public forecourt on the word of his own imagination. If you have one particle of the honor your mother bored the court about, you will stop this now." It was the wrong thing to say. I knew it was the wrong thing the instant it left her, and I think if she could have called it back she would have, because Morwenna was too clever a woman to have said it if she had not, for one moment, lost her grip on herself. She had reached for the late Queen Isolde as a weapon, meaning to shame Rowan with his mother's memory, and instead she had reminded him, out loud, in front of witnesses, that his mother's honor was exactly the thing at stake, and that his mother's things had been going missing for 2 years, and that he was standing at the open boot of the woman most of the realm quietly believed had been taking them. Rowan's face did not change. That was the terrible thing about him, and I say terrible as a compliment. In the moment his stepmother invoked his dead mother to stop him, the Crown Prince of the realm did not flinch, did not flush, did not raise his voice. He only looked at the carriage, and then at me, and he said very quietly, "Show me the false floor, guardsman." I lifted the second chest out. Beneath it, where the floor of the boot should have been, there was a panel of dark wood fitted flush, so cleanly done that in the shadow of the boot you would never have seen the seam unless you were looking for it, and I was looking for it. It had a finger hole no bigger than a coin at one edge. I put my finger in it and I lifted, and the panel came up, and beneath it was a compartment the length of the boot and a hand span deep, and it was not empty. It held a strong box, iron-bound, small enough to carry under a cloak, with a good lock on it, the kind of box a man keeps the papers in that he cannot afford to have found. And beside the strong box, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with cord, were 3 flat bundles that had the unmistakable shape and heft of documents. A great many documents. I lifted the strong box out and set it on the cobbles, and then the bundles, 1, 2, 3, and I laid them in a row where the whole forecourt could see them, and I stepped back, because they were not mine to open. Whatever was in the Queen Consort's hidden compartment, it was not a gate soldier's business to be the one who broke the seal. That was the Crown Prince's business now, and I had put it in his reach, and there my duty ended and his began. "Your Grace," Rowan said toward the carriage, and his voice was gentle, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted, "Will you give us the key to this box? Or shall I have the household locksmith brought?" The curtain did not move. "Bring the locksmith," Rowan said. And it was in the waiting, in the long, cold, awful waiting while the runner went for the locksmith, and the forecourt stood in silence around a strong box and 3 bundles of paper on the wet cobbles, that Captain Bale made the last mistake of his career, and I nearly missed it because I was watching the carriage. It was Osric who saw. Osric, standing a little apart with the log, watching everything the way a fen man watches water, saw Captain Bale drift, one slow, easy step at a time, toward the row of bundles on the cobbles, and saw his boot come to rest against the nearest of them, and begin, with the smallest pressure, to slide it back toward the shadow under the carriage. "Captain," Osric said, in his flat fen voice that carried further than a shout, "you're standing on the evidence." Every head in the forecourt turned. Bale froze with his boot on the bundle, and for one instant the mask came all the way off, and I saw underneath it not a soldier and not a courtier but a small frightened man who had backed the wrong power and knew it, and Rowan saw it too, and something in the prince's face closed like a door. "Step away from those papers, Captain Bale," Rowan said. "Guardsman Reeve. As of this moment, Captain Bale is relieved of the duty of officer of the day, and is to consider himself confined to his quarters pending inquiry. Corporal, log the time and log the reason, that he was observed attempting to interfere with items under lawful inspection. Do it now in front of him, so there's no question later of what was seen." Osric wrote it. Bale's face worked, and for a moment I thought he might say something, might plead or bluster or threaten, but there is a mercy in disgrace that comes swiftly, and Bale took it. He stepped back from the bundles, and he said nothing at all, and he stood with his braced sash, and his climbing man's ambition draining out of him onto the wet stones. 2 guardsmen from the wall came down at my signal and stood at his shoulders, not touching him, only present, the way we are trained to be present with a man who has stopped being a captain and become a problem. The locksmith came. He was an old man with spectacles and a roll of picks, and he knelt on the cobbles with the ease of a man who had knelt on a great many floors in his life, and been very discreet about all of them, and he had the strong box open in the time it takes to say a prayer. Rowan crouched beside it. He did not reach in at once. He looked at me first, a strange thing, that a prince should look to a gate soldier before opening a box, and I understood that he was giving me the chance, one last time, to be wrong in private rather than in public. "If this is nothing," he said, low only to me, "you'll have made an enemy of my father's wife for the rest of your life, and I'll not be able to protect you from all of it. You know that." "I know it, Highness," I said. "Then God help us both," said Crown Prince Rowan, and he opened the box. The first thing on top was money. Not the money of a lady going to a river house, a purse of silver for the milliner and the tolls, but a banker's roll of the realm's high notes, the kind used to settle debts that must not be seen in a ledger, bound with a paper band that bore the mark of a lending house on the far side of the city, a house that lent to men who could not be seen borrowing. Rowan set it aside without a word. Money was the least of it. Money is only ever the least of it. The money is the thing they are willing to be found with, because it can always be explained. It is the paper under the money that ruins people. Under the money were the papers. Rowan lifted the first document out and unfolded it, and I watched his eyes move down the page, and I watched his face, which had not changed for his stepmother, which had not changed for Bale, change now. Not much. A tightening at the jaw. A slow breath drawn and held. But I had spent the morning learning to read this man, and I read it, and what I read was a son looking at the proof of a thing he had spent 2 years refusing to believe. "It's a deed," he said. His voice was steady, and it cost him to keep it so. "A deed of conveyance for the estate at Renfell. My mother's estate." He turned it toward the light. "It transfers Renfell in full, the house, the land, the tenant rents, all of it, from the Crown to the private holding of Lord Cassius, her son. It's dated 3 months from now." He looked up. "It's post-dated. It's a deed for a thing that hasn't happened yet, waiting for the day it can be made to have happened." I did not fully understand, then, the whole shape of what I was looking at, and I will not pretend I did. But Rowan understood it, and in the hours and days that followed the king's own men of law understood it in still greater detail. And this, as near as I have ever been able to set it down plainly, is what those papers were. The Queen Consort had not been stealing the late Queen Isolde's things by night and hiding them in a cellar. That would have been the work of a common thief, and Morwenna was not common. What she had been doing patiently for 2 years was building document by document, seal by seal, signature by signature, a legal fiction. A paper world in which the late Queen Isolde's estate had never truly belonged to Crown Prince Rowan at all, but had been held in trust by the household, and in which that trust could be lawfully wound up and its holdings released to whichever hand held the right papers at the right moment. Renfell to Cassius, the Eastern jewels to Verena, the bred horses, the plate, the tapestries, the rents, each with its own post-dated deed, its own forged trust, its own carefully constructed pretense of law, so that on some near morning the Queen Consort's children would wake up owning half of what had been Isolde's, and it would all be legal, or legal enough, and Rowan would find that the war he had refused to fight had been lost while he was being patient. And the reason it was in the boot of a carriage bound for the river house, under a false floor, sealed in haste. The reason for all of it was that the paper world was not finished. It needed one more thing. It needed a seal that could not be forged, the great seal of the household treasury, which the king's tired hand still nominally controlled, and which lived in the treasury office under lock and key, and the eye of a keeper who could not be bribed. The river house was not a river house at all. It was where the last piece of the fraud was to be assembled, quietly, away from the palace, by men who could be paid to do delicate work with wax and iron. And the strongbox in the false floor held the master documents that everything else depended on, being carried out of the palace to be finished. I had not stopped a queen going to the river. I had stopped a scheme going to its forge. "There's more," Rowan said. He was working through the second bundle now, and his hands, which had been steady, were not quite steady. "Letters, instructions in her hand. I know her hand. I've read 100 of her notes to Cassius, telling him what to sign, when to be seen, what to say if he's asked." He went still over 1 page for a long moment. "And a list of names, household officers who have been paid or promised or leaned on." He did not read the names aloud, but his eyes went once to Captain Bale standing between the 2 guardsmen, and Bale, who could not have seen the page from where he stood, went white all the same, because a guilty man does not need to see the list to know he is on it. The curtain of the carriage had not moved in a long time, and now into the silence of the forecourt it drew back, not twitched, not shifted, but drawn fully aside by a pale hand, and the Queen Consort Morwenna looked out at us for the first time that morning. She was a handsome woman still, past 50, and carrying it like a crown, with a face that had been schooled from girlhood to give away nothing. She looked at the strongbox open on the cobbles, and the row of bundles, and the deed in Rowan's hands, and the money, and the picks in the old locksmith's roll. And she looked last at me, at Havard Reeve of the North checkpoint, in my red tunic and my white gloves, the gate soldier she had offered a warm old age not 2 hours before. "You have no idea," she said to me, and her voice was perfectly level, "what you have done." "No, your grace," I said, and I meant it honestly. "I only knew the seal was wrong." She turned her eyes from me to Rowan, and I braced for the storm, for the fury, the denial, the invocation of the king, the whole armory of a cornered great lady. It did not come. Instead, she did something far more dangerous and far more like herself. She smiled very slightly, and she leaned back into the shadow of the carriage, and she said, in a voice pitched to carry to every man on that forecourt, "How very brave of my stepson, to open a box in the street. Tell me, Rowan, where do you imagine those documents came from? Whose seals are on them? Whose treasury issued them? Whose clerks drew them up? Whose signature is at the foot of the trust? You found a box of papers. You have not found who made them lawful. Open your box a little wider, dear boy, and be quite sure you want to know whose hand is at the bottom of it, because it is not only mine." And there it was, the counterstroke, delivered from the ruin of her own carriage, cool as river water. She was telling us in front of witnesses that if she went down she would not go down alone, that the fraud reached up into offices and hands that the crown could not afford to expose without tearing the household in two, that the papers I had so bravely spread on the cobbles were a loaded weapon that could be turned to point in a great many directions, hers being only one of them. She was not denying the scheme. She was daring the Crown Prince to reckon the true cost of proving it. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at the deed in his hands, and he folded it once along its old fold with great care. "You're right, mother," he said. "This is more than a box of papers. Which is exactly why it will not be settled here in the street on my word alone." He rose to his feet. "Guardsman Reeve, nothing leaves this forecourt. Not the box, not the papers, not the money, not the carriage, and not her grace. Everything and everyone stays under guard exactly as they are until the king's men of law and the warden of the household can be brought to see it with their own eyes in the state we found it. You understand me? Not moved, not sorted, not touched. Seen." "I understand, Highness," I said. "Then seal this forecourt," said the Crown Prince, "and send for my father." We sealed the forecourt. It is a thing more easily ordered than done, but I had good men on the wall and Osric at my shoulder, and within a quarter hour the north gate of Harrowgate was closed to all comers, the carriage ringed by guardsmen, the strongbox and the bundles under a canvas waited at its corners, so that not a page could go astray on the wind, and the Queen Consort still seated in her carriage with the curtain now open, watching all of us with the patience of a woman who has been in tighter places than a sealed forecourt and has always talked her way out. I want to tell you about that waiting, because the waiting was where the real battle was fought, and it was not fought with rifles. And I want to tell you, because it belongs here and nowhere else, about the morning I did not look, the one my sergeant never let me forget, the one that made me the kind of man who read manifests until his eyes ached. I was young then, in my second winter at a different gate, on the west side of the old palace before Harrowgate was even my post. A cart came through carrying grain sacks, and the driver was a cheerful red-faced man who knew all the guardsmen's names and always had a joke and a wineskin, and his manifest was in order, and his seal was true, and I liked him, and I waved him through the way I waved him through twice a week. And under the grain sacks that morning was a boy, a runaway apprentice, beaten half to death by a master he'd fled, being carried out of the city by that cheerful red-faced man to be sold on to worse. I did not find him. Another gate found him 3 days later, more dead than alive, and the cart driver hanged for it, and I stood at the hanging with my sergeant, and I was sick, and my sergeant put his hand on my shoulder and said the only cruel thing he ever said to me, because he knew I needed it. "You liked him. That's how they get past you, boy, not the ones you fear. The ones you like with the true seal and the good joke. You'll read every cart from now until you die, and you'll be right too. I have read every cart from that day to this. I read them because of a boy under grain sacks whose name I never learned, and whose face I never saw, and who has been at my shoulder at every gate I have ever stood, telling me to look. When the Queen Consort offered me a warm old age to not look in her boot, it was that boy who answered her, through me. A man does not become the kind of soldier who inconveniences a queen by being brave. He becomes it by failing once badly when it mattered, and never being able to bear the thought of failing that way again. My discipline is not virtue. It is a scar. But the realm is defended by men's scars as often as by their virtues, and the scar does not care which morning it saves, so long as it saves it. So, the waiting. It was where the real battle was fought, and it was not fought with rifles. Word does not stay behind a sealed gate. It never has. By the time the runner reached the king's apartments, half the household knew that the Queen Consort's carriage had been stopped at the north gate and something had been found in it, and the other half knew by the time the king's man of law, a dry old advocate named Lord Cassius. No, I will be careful, there were two men of that world I must keep straight, and I will call the king's advocate the warden, which was his title, the warden of the household, an office older than any living man, whose duty was the law of the royal house itself, and who answered, by ancient right, to the king alone and to no one's convenience. The warden was the one man in Harrowgate whom Morwenna had never been able to buy, promise, or lean on, and everyone knew it, and that, I think, was why she had built her whole paper world to be finished at the river house and not in the palace, to keep it out of the warden's sight until it was too finished to unmake. Now the warden was coming to the forecourt, and her paper world was spread on the cobbles under a canvas, and she was still smiling. While we waited, Lady Verena came to the gate. She came on foot, from the direction of the household offices, walking quickly with a satchel of papers under her arm, and I understood at once, from the papers, from the haste, from the fact that she came at all, that she had been sent. Not by her mother. Her mother could send no one from a sealed carriage. She had come on her own reading of the situation, which meant that word of the stop had reached the offices where the fraud was kept, and someone there had done the arithmetic and decided that the way to save the paper world was to get more paper into it, fast, before the warden arrived. Some counter-document, some backdated authorization, some clever legal patch to make the deeds in the strongbox look lawful after all. She was clever than her brother. Her brother would run, Verena would file. Guardsman. She was cool, like her mother, but younger and quicker, and she did not waste a speech on me. I'm here on treasury business, entirely separate from whatever's happened at this gate. I need to deposit these into my mother's carriage before it's moved, travel authorizations, nothing more. It's a moment's work. Stand aside. The forecourt's sealed by order of the Crown Prince, my lady, I said. Nothing comes in and nothing goes out. That includes paper. This paper is time-sensitive treasury. Especially paper, I said. She looked at me and I watched her recalculate, and I will give her this. She was fast. She saw in a heartbeat that the gate soldier in front of her was not going to be talked past, and she changed her whole shape. The papers went behind her back. The treasury business evaporated, and she became, instantly, a young woman merely anxious for her mother. Then at least let me see her. She'll be frightened. She's my mother. And that was a good play, better than her brother's, because it aimed at a guardsman's decency instead of his obedience. But I had watched the papers go behind her back, and Osric had watched them too, and Osric said in his flat, thin voice, "What's in the satchel, my lady?" Verena went still, and in the half-second before she answered, Rowan, who missed nothing, crossed the forecourt to us and held out his hand, palm up, and said only, "Verena, the satchel." She did not give it to him. She clutched it, and for a moment I thought she would try the office's oldest trick and simply tear the pages before anyone could read them. But there were guardsmen at every point of that forecourt, and the warden's coming was already known, and she was clever enough to know that a woman caught destroying documents is a woman confessing to whatever was on them. So she surrendered the satchel, and Rowan opened it, and inside were 3 fresh authorizations, drawn that very morning in a treasury clerk's hand, backdated by 2 years, designed to make it appear that the household trust over Isolde's estate had been lawfully created long ago with the king's knowledge. The exact patch the paper world needed to survive daylight. "You were going to slip these into the evidence," Rowan said, very quietly, before the warden could count what was really there. "I was going to protect my family," Verena said, and it was the first true thing she had said, and it did her no good at all. Rowan handed the satchel to me. "Under seal with the rest," he said, "and Lady Verena stays on the forecourt with everyone else. She came to add a lie to a pile of them. She can stand in the cold and watch us find the truth instead." He looked at her with something that was almost pity. "You made it worse, Verena. You've just handed the warden the proof that the fraud was still being built this morning. There's no backdating your way out of that." So we had them all then inside the sealed gate. The Queen Consort in her carriage, Cassius soon to run and be caught, Verena caught already, Bale under guard, the whole machinery of the scheme gathered by its own panic onto one wet forecourt, each of them having done, in their fright, more damage to their cause than any accusation of mine ever could. Guilt is a loud thing when it is cornered. It cannot help but move, and every move is a confession. The king came first. I had seen King Alaric perhaps a dozen times in 11 winters, always at a distance, always in the robes, and under the weight of ceremony that made him seem less a man than a monument. I had never seen him as he came onto the forecourt that morning, in a plain dark coat, leaning on a stick, moving with the careful slowness of a man whose body has begun to charge him rent for every step, his white hair uncovered in the gray light, his face, and this is the thing I remember, his face frightened. Not of us, of what he had been brought out to see. A man does not reign 40 years without learning the particular dread of the summons that begins "Your son sends for you to the north gate, my lord, and begs you come," and will not say why. Rowan met him at the edge of the forecourt and put a hand under his father's arm, and for a moment the two of them stood close, and the prince spoke low and fast, and I could not hear the words, but I saw the king's face as they landed on him, and I have never in my life seen hope die more slowly in a man. He looked toward the carriage. He looked at the canvas on the cobbles. He looked at his wife, framed in the open window in the gray light, and she looked back at him. And I will give her this, to the last she was magnificent in her way. She did not look away, and she did not weep, and she did not plead. She inclined her head to her husband, the small graceful nod of a queen to a king, as though nothing at all were on the cobbles between them. "Alaric," she said, "you look tired. You should not have come out. Whatever the boy has told you, it is a great deal less than it seems, and we will untangle it quietly, you and I, as we untangle everything." She let her voice soften, and it was a beautiful thing to hear, and a terrible one, because you could see it reaching for the old grooves worn into 40 years of a tired man saying yes. "Send them all away. Come and sit with me. Let me tell you what really happened before strangers make it into something it isn't." And I watched the king of the realm waver. I want to be truthful about this, because it is the part of the morning that has stayed with me longest. It would be a fine tale to say the king saw the deeds and the fraud and drew himself up in righteous fury and cast his false queen down. He did not. He was old and he was tired, and he had loved this woman, in whatever worn-out way an old man loves the wife who makes the yeses easy, and every instinct of 40 years told him that the simplest thing, the kindest thing, the thing that would let him go back inside and sit down and not have his heart broken on a wet forecourt in front of his guardsman, was to believe her, to send us away, to let it be untangled quietly, which is the word powerful people use for made to disappear. I saw the wish move across his old face, and I saw his hand tighten on his stick, and I understood that the whole thing, the whole 2 years of it, might yet end here, in a tired old man's longing to be told a comfortable lie by a beautiful voice. It was Rowan who held the line, and he held it not with force but with his mother. "Father," he said, he did not raise his voice, "do you remember what my mother, Isolde, used to say about Renfell? That it wasn't the house she cared for or the rents but the elm walk, because she'd planted the elms herself the spring I was born, and she meant to see me walk my own son down it one day." He drew the folded deed from his coat. "There's a paper here that gives the elm walk to Cassius, post-dated, with a trust behind it that was drawn up in secret and sealed with an office seal, waiting only for the great seal of your treasury to make it law. It was in a hidden floor of that carriage, being carried out of the palace this morning to be finished where you'd never see it." He held the deed out to his father, not as an accusation, but as a son shows his father a wound. "I didn't go looking for this, father. A guardsman at the north gate saw a wax seal pressed too hot, and he did his duty, and this is what was under it. I need you to look at it. I know it's the last thing in the world you want to do. Look at it anyway. For her. For my mother." The king took the deed. His hand shook. He read it slowly, the way old men read, holding it to the gray light and moving his lips a little over the words, and I watched the comfortable lie die in him, because there are some things a man cannot unsee once they are in his own hands in his mother's son's writing, and the hand at the foot of that trust, the hand that had drawn it all up and set it in motion, was a hand the king knew as well as his own. He lowered the deed. He looked at his wife, and when he spoke, his voice was not the voice of a monument, and it was not the voice of a furious king. It was the voice of a very old man who has just been told the one thing he spent his last years arranging not to know. "Morwenna," he said, "what have you done to my son's mother's house?" She held his eyes. "And she made, then, the choice that I think decided everything that came after, the choice to keep smiling, to keep to the counterstroke, to gamble that the machinery she had built into the household ran too deep to be pulled out by the roots without pulling the whole house down with it. I have done nothing," she said, "that your own treasury did not seal, your own clerks did not draw, and your own advocates did not bless. If there is a crime on those cobbles, my lord husband, then a great many men in your service committed it, and you may hang them all, or you may be sensible, and let it be untangled quietly. The choice, as ever, is yours." She smiled at him, gently, dreadfully. "You were always so much happier when the choice was mine." That was the moment the warden came through the gate. I had expected, I confess, a grander figure. The warden of the household was a small, stooped man of perhaps 70, in a black gown gone green at the seams with age, carrying a battered leather satchel that looked older than he was, flanked by 2 clerks and a pair of the household's own inquirymen, gray-coated officers who answered to the warden's office and to nothing else. He did not look at the king, or the prince, or the Queen Consort. He looked first, and for a long time, at the canvas on the cobbles. "Who has touched what is under that cloth?" he said. His voice was thin and completely without warmth, the voice of a man who had spent 50 years being lied to and had stopped finding it interesting. "No one, my lord warden, since it was uncovered," I said. "The Crown Prince ordered it left in the state we found it. It's been under guard and under canvas. The strongbox was opened by the household locksmith in the prince's presence, and its contents laid out and not sorted. Nothing's left the forecourt." He turned his small eyes on me. "Your name?" "Havard Reeve, my lord, North Checkpoint." "You made the stop?" "I did." "On what ground?" I told him. The wax pressed too hot, the smeared swan, the low springs, the manifest declaring less than the load. I told it plainly, in the order I had seen it, and I did not add anything to make myself larger in it, because I had begun to understand that the warden was a man who could hear the difference between a report and a boast the way I could hear the difference between a true seal and a hasty one, and that my whole standing in what was to come would rest on his believing that I had seen exactly what I said I saw and nothing more. He listened without a flicker. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, and then he did a thing I did not expect. He inclined his head to me, a small, dry, precise motion, the way one professional acknowledges another. "You read the manifest," he said. "In 11 winters, guardsman, you may be the first man at that gate who has." "Well done." He turned from me before I could answer, and knelt with difficulty, his old knees protesting at the edge of the canvas, and drew it back, and looked at the strongbox and the money and the 3 bundles of paper with the expression of a man who has been handed, at the very end of his long career, the case he had given up hoping to be handed. Then he stood, and he turned to the Queen Consort, and he said the words that I believe she had spent 2 years arranging never to hear. "Your Grace, by the ancient right of my office, which answers to the king's person and to no household officer, no minister, and no convenience of state, I am seizing every document in this compartment as evidence, and I am placing them under the seal of the wardenship, which no hand in this realm but the king's own may break. You have said, and I heard you say it, that the crime, if crime there be, reaches into the treasury, the clerks, and the advocates of the household. I am glad to hear it. It means my inquiry will be thorough." His thin voice did not change at all. "You have supposed, I think, that the reach of your machinery is your protection, that the crown cannot pull out the root without felling the tree. You have made the common error of the clever. You have mistaken a great many small compromised men for a wall. But a wall of compromised men, your Grace, is the easiest wall in the world to take, because every stone in it would rather be a witness than a defendant, and my office exists precisely to offer them the choice. By nightfall, I shall have half the names on that list of yours begging to give me the other half." And I watched the smile go out of Morwenna's face at last. It did not go out all at once. It flickered, the way a lamp flickers when the door opens and the draught finds it, and I saw her reach for another counterstroke, another cool line, another dare. But the warden had taken from her the one thing all her counterstrokes stood on, the belief that the whole business was too tangled, too dangerous, too dear to unravel, and that a tired old king would rather look away. The warden was not tired, and he was not the king, and he did not care in the least how dear it was to unravel. He cared only that it be unraveled, thread by thread, name by name, until the truth of it stood naked on the cobbles. And she saw in his small, unimpressed eyes that he meant every word, and that her machinery, which had run so smoothly for 2 years, had just met the one gear it could not buy. "You have no idea," she began, "what it will cost this house to—" "I have every idea," said the warden, "what it has already cost the late Queen's memory, which is more than I permit any living person to spend. Take her documents into the king's evidence," he said to his gray-coated men, "and send to the Treasury office. I want the keeper of the Great Seal, and I want the seal itself, and I want the clerk who drew this trust, brought before me tonight, not summoned, brought before any one of them has an hour alone to burn a page." The graycoats moved. And it was in that moment, as the machinery of the wardenship began at last to turn against the machinery Morwenna had built, that the last piece of the morning fell, because Lord Cassius, who had been sent for by the king's runner along with everyone else, and who had come to the gate not knowing what he walked into, arrived on the forecourt at exactly the wrong moment, saw the strongbox open on the cobbles and the deeds in the warden's hands and his own name on a post-dated conveyance, and did the single most ruinous thing a frightened guilty man can do. He tried to run. He did not get far. He turned in the gate and he ran 3 steps, and Osric put out one square Fen country arm and Cassius went into it and sat down hard on the cobbles, and it was, I am sorry to say, not a dignified end to the schemes of a soft-handed man, and the sound the forecourt made was not laughter, quite, but it was close, and it was the sound of a great pretense collapsing all at once, because a man does not run from a thing he can explain. Cassius had spent 2 years being told by his mother that he had nothing to fear, that it was all lawful, that it was all in hand, and the instant he saw it laid bare on the stones, his own legs told the truth his mouth had been trained to hide. He ran, and in running he confessed, in front of the king, the prince, the warden, and every guardsman on the wall, more completely than any document could. The Queen Consort closed her eyes. just for a moment. It was the only time all morning I saw her look, not frightened, not furious, but simply tired almost, as the old king she had married, and I understood that she had lost, and that she knew it, and that the knowing had cost her more than any of us would ever see. The rest of that day belonged to other men, to the warden and his grey coats, to the clerks who carried the sealed documents into the king's own strong room under a triple guard, to the inquirymen who went to the treasury office and found the keeper of the Great Seal already reaching for a candle to burn a page, and who took the page and the candle and the keeper all three. It belonged to the household, which shook itself apart and put itself back together over the following weeks as name after name came off the Queen Consort's list, and man after compromised man made the easiest bargain in the world and chose to be a witness rather than a defendant, exactly as the warden had said they would. But I stood the forecourt until dusk, because the prince had ordered that nothing leave it, and no one had thought to lift the order. And a guardsman who is not relieved does not walk off his post because the excitement is over. So I was there in the failing gray light, when the carriage was at last drawn away to the household yard to be searched down to its axles. And I was there when Lord Cassius was led off, no longer running, to a comfortable room with a lock on the outside of the door. And I was there when they brought Captain Bale down from his quarters and walked him past me, and he would not meet my eye, and I did not make him. And I was there when they came for the Queen Consort. They did it gently. I will say that for the Crown Prince who arranged it. There were no chains, no rough hands, no crowd let in to gape. The warden's grey coats and two of my own guardsmen simply stood by her carriage door and waited, and Rowan himself came and offered her his arm, to the woman who had spent 2 years dismantling his dead mother's memory. And after a long moment she took it, and stepped down onto the cobbles, and walked with him across the forecourt with her head high and her back straight, every inch a queen, to the rooms in the North Tower where a great lady of the house is kept when she can no longer be trusted at liberty, but is not yet, in the eyes of the law, condemned. As they passed me she stopped. Rowan, courteous even now, allowed it. "Guardsman Reeve," she said. She looked at me the way you look at a thing you have decided to understand before you leave it behind. "You could have been warm, you chose the gate." She tilted her head. "Do you know what you have chosen it for? Not gratitude. They'll not love you for this. The house will be ashamed to remember it happened, and a guardsman who watched a queen fall is a guardsman the whole court would rather forget. You've made yourself a small, uncomfortable memory in a great house. That is your reward. I hope your seal was worth it." "Your Grace," I said, "I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because the seal was wrong and I read manifests. And then, because she had spoken to me honestly and I found I could not send her off with only the answer of a wall, I added, 'I'm sorry it came to the tower.' I am, but the late queen planted those elms the spring the prince was born, and she meant him to walk his own son down them, and that wasn't yours to give away. Nobody's warmth is worth that." She looked at me for a moment longer, and whatever she found in my face, she gave a small, dry, unwilling nod, not unlike the warden's. Oddly, the acknowledgment one gives an opponent who played the hand correctly. And she walked on the arm of the prince into the tower and out of the running of the realm, and I never spoke to her again. The inquiry took the better part of 2 months, and I was called to it 4 times. I will not set down all of it, because a great deal of it was the dry, slow, necessary work of the law, the matching of hands to documents, the tracing of the trust back through the offices it had crawled through, the long parade of small compromised men explaining, one after another, how they had told themselves that a signature here and a seal there was only a small thing, a sensible thing, a choosing of which way the wind sat. I heard my own phrase, or near to it, come back at me a dozen times from a dozen mouths, and every time it landed colder, because every one of those men had heard the same speech I had heard at the gate, the speech about the warm old age and the small sensible choice, and every one of them had chosen differently than I did, and now they stood in the warden's chamber and paid for it. One of those 4 times I was called, I stood beside a witness I will not forget. The young footman from the carriage box, the one whose fingers had shaken when he handed me the keys. His name was Perrin, and he was 19, and he had spent a year in the Queen Consort's household learning, a little at a time, that the errands he ran were not the errands he was told they were. He had carried sealed boxes to the river house before. He had not asked what was in them, because asking was not a footman's business, and a footman who asks is a footman turned off without a character. But he had watched me open the false floor, and something in him had broken clean, and when the warden's men came to him, he did not lie for a single moment. He told them everything: the other mornings, the other boxes, the men at the river house with their wax and their small hot irons, the times he had been sent away from the room so he would not see, and the once he had come back too soon and seen more than he should. He was the thread that let the warden unravel the river house entire. "Why did you tell them?" I asked him in the antechamber while we waited to be called. "You'd have kept your place if you'd held your tongue. You'd have been warm." He looked at me, the same word the Queen Consort had used, warm, and I do not think he knew he was using it, and he said, "When you opened that floor, sir, and laid the papers out on the stones where everyone could see, I thought, he's a gate soldier. Nobody." And he looked. "What's my excuse then? What's my excuse?" He turned his cap in his hands. "I'd rather be turned off than be a man who had an excuse. I have thought about that more than I have thought about the deeds or the tower or the king's judgment." A gate soldier looked, and a footman decided he could not live being a man with an excuse, and between the two of us, nobody and nobody, the fraud came down. That is how it always comes down in the end, not by the great and the clever, by the small people who run out of excuses. The heart of it, when the warden laid it out at last before the king, was this: the whole paper world was real, and the whole paper world was void. Real because Morwenna had truly built it, the forged trusts, the post-dated deeds, the bought clerks, the suborned keeper of the Great Seal, all of it aimed at transferring the late Queen Isolde's estate, whole, into the hands of her own children before Rowan's full inheritance could close the door, and void because I had stopped it one seal short. The Great Seal had never gone onto the Master Trust. The River House forge had never lit. The paper world had been carried out of the palace in the false floor of a carriage to be finished, and it had been finished by no one, because a gate soldier had read a manifest, and so not one deed of it had ever become law, and every particle of Isolde's estate remained exactly where her death had left it, her son's. The warden made a point of that in his dry way before the king and the court. The thing was one morning from being lawful, he said. One seal. Had the carriage passed the north gate unsearched, we would be untangling this for 10 years in the courts against the machinery she built, and I could promise your majesty nothing. It did not pass. It was searched, and so there is nothing to untangle at all. The fraud was stopped before it became a fact. He looked, when he said it, at me, standing at the back of the chamber in my red tunic. The realm owes that to a guardsman who did the least glamorous thing in the whole of soldiering. He read the paperwork. The judgments, when they came, were the king's to make, and he made them himself, which surprised the court, because many had thought him too tired and too broken by the whole business to do more than sign what the warden put in front of him. But there is a kind of strength that comes to old men at the very end of their patience, and King Alaric found it. He sat the judgment in the great hall, in the full robes he had not worn in a year, with Crown Prince Rowan at his right hand, and the warden below the dais, and the sealed evidence on a table before them all, and he did not look tired at all. Lord Cassius, who had run, and whose running had confessed him, was stripped of the courtesies, and the incomes the household had granted him, and sent from Harrowgate to live out his days on a small remote holding under the eye of the warden's men, forbidden the court and forbidden the capital, to be soft-handed and idle somewhere he could do no more harm. Lady Verena, whose name was on fewer of the papers and who had, when the machinery collapsed, been quicker than her brother to tell the warden everything she knew in exchange for her liberty, was permitted to leave the realm quietly for a kinswoman's house abroad, and did, and I am told never returned. The bought clerks and the suborned keeper of the Great Seal were tried by the warden's office and dismissed, and several of them imprisoned, because the king held rightly, I think, that a man who sells the king's own seal has committed a graver thing than a courtier's greed. Captain Bale was broken from his rank. He was not imprisoned. The warden judged that his crime had been the crime of the weather vane, of the man who bends whichever way the powerful wind blows, and that such a man is a coward more than a villain. But he was put out of the guard, stripped of the sash he wore too tight, and sent away, and the last I heard of him he was a gatekeeper on a private estate 3 counties off, opening a gate for a minor lord, which struck me, when I heard it, as a kind of justice so exact that no court could have designed it. He had wanted to climb. He climbed down to a gate. The Queen Consort Morwenna was neither hanged nor imprisoned, because the king would not do that to the woman he had married, however she had used him, and because the warden counseled that a public trial of a queen consort for fraud would tear the household as surely as she had hoped to tear it. Instead, she was set aside. The king, breaking a silence of 40 years, did the hardest and quietest thing of his long reign. He undid the marriage formally and completely under the ancient law of the house, and sent her to a dower estate far in the north country, comfortable and honorable and utterly without power, watched, forbidden the court and the capital and any office of the household forever. It is not the ending a story wants. A story wants her ruined on the cobbles. But the realm is not a story, and the ending the realm got was better than the one a story wants. The machinery she built was pulled out by the roots, name by name, until nothing of it remained, and the woman herself was set gently and permanently outside the door, where she could scheme all she liked at the empty air of the north. And the late Queen Isolde's estate came home, all of it, Renfell whole, the house, the rents, the tenant farms, and the elm walk, the elm she had planted the spring her son was born, the eastern jewels, the bred horses, the plate and the tapestries, and the locked room in the east wing, which Rowan opened at last alone and stayed in for a long afternoon and never spoke of after. It was all made fast to the Crown Prince by deeds the warden himself drew, and the king himself sealed with the Great Seal, in the open, before witnesses, so that no post-dated paper could ever crawl at it again. As for me, the Queen Consort had told me, on the cobbles, that I had chosen the gate over the warmth, and that my reward would be to become a small, uncomfortable memory in a great house that would rather forget me. She was half right, which is the most a prophet of her kind is ever allowed to be. The house was uncomfortable for a while, remembering that a queen had fallen at the north gate. Grand houses do not like to remember the mornings they were saved from themselves. But I was not forgotten, and here she was wrong, and the reason she was wrong was Crown Prince Rowan, who did not forget things, and who understood, as his mother had understood before him, that the whole realm rests in the end on the small, unglamorous men who read the paperwork and hold the line when they are offered a warm bargain not to. He did not make me a captain. I would not have taken it. I am a gate soldier, and a gate soldier is what I am good for. What he did was quieter, and I valued it more. He came to the north checkpoint, one clear morning some weeks after the judgment, alone in his plain riding coat, the way he had come the first morning, and he stood with me at the gate for a while and watched the carriages pass, and then he said, "My mother used to say that the honor of a house isn't kept in its throne room. It's kept at its doors by the men no one thanks." He looked at me. She was right. Thank you, Havard Reeve. And he gave me his hand, Prince to guardsman, there at the gate, and then he went back up the steps and left me to my post, and that was all, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything a man in my trade is ever properly owed. I have stood the north checkpoint of Harrowgate for a dozen winters now. I still read every manifest, letter by letter, because my old sergeant taught me that a lie hides best where no one bothers to look. Most mornings the seals are true, and the springs sit right, and the wheels go through, and nothing happens and nothing is supposed to. That is the work. A guardsman's whole life is the 10,000 mornings when he reads the paper and finds it honest, so that on the one morning it is not, on the one gray morning when the wax is pressed too hot, and the swan is smeared, and a great cool voice offers him a warm old age to look away. He is a man who reads manifests, and he looks, and he does not open the gate. They will always tell you it is a small thing. The size of the thing they call small is exactly the measure of how much they are afraid of it. My sergeant told me that, and he is buried in the guardsman's plot beyond the mews, and I have never once, in a dozen winters, found him to be wrong. The seal was wrong, so I looked. That is the whole of it, and it was worth a warm old age, and I would trade it again tomorrow, and twice on the day the wax is smeared.